Something happened at a Cleveland Browns press conference that most people completely glossed over. A first-year head coach walked up to a microphone, answered a few questions, and in the span of about 30 seconds, quietly detonated the entire quarterback narrative that the national media had been building all offseason. No drama, no raised voice, no theatrics whatsoever, just a calm, measured statement that, if you were paying close enough attention, told you everything you needed to know about where this quarterback competition is actually headed. And the crazy part? Most people missed it entirely because they were too busy watching the highlight everyone was already talking about. But we're going to break all of it down today, because when you connect every single dot, the press conference comments, the OTA rotations, the practice numbers, the contract situation, and the history, the Browns quarterback race looks completely different from what television and sports radio have been selling you. And by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why. Todd Monken doesn't waste words. That's the first thing you need to understand about this man before anything else in this story makes sense. He spent years building one of the most sophisticated offensive systems in college football down at Georgia. His quarterbacks didn't survive in that offense by being average. They survived by thinking fast, processing information faster than the defense could react, and executing with precision under enormous pressure. Stetson Bennett, Carson Beck, JT Daniels. These are quarterbacks who operated in a system that punished mental mistakes immediately and without mercy. Survival in Monken's offense literally meant think fast or get out. That's his standard. That's always been his standard. So when Todd Monken stood at that podium during a Cleveland press conference and specifically called out Shedeur Sanders for his improved decision-making, his faster ball release, and his rapidly growing mastery of the offensive playbook, that was not a throwaway comment designed to keep reporters happy. Coaches at Monken's level do not hand out specific, detailed compliments without meaning every single word. These weren't vague football platitudes like "he's been working hard" or "we like his attitude." These were surgical observations about the exact areas where Shedeur Sanders had been most heavily criticized since his college days: reading NFL defenses quickly, processing complex schemes under pressure, getting the ball out on time. Those were the questions. Monken just publicly answered all three of them in Shedeur's favor, and that should have stopped everyone in their tracks. But that wasn't even the most telling part of how he said it. Here's something most casual football fans don't fully appreciate. NFL press conferences are essentially professional exercises in saying absolutely nothing. Coaches spend years mastering the art of speaking for several minutes while revealing zero information of actual substance. A head coach can watch his starting quarterback throw 5 interceptions in practice and walk up to the media 5 minutes later and genuinely say with a straight face, "We saw some good things today. We're making progress." That is the nature of the business. Protect your guys, protect your strategy, and give the media just enough to fill their articles without handing over anything real. Monken is exceptionally good at this game. When reporters pushed him repeatedly about the competition during OTA week, he looked them dead in the eye and said, and this is almost a direct quote, that nothing had changed except it was a different day and they were asking the same questions. That is a masterclass in deflection. That is a coach who has seen every media trick in the book and refuses to play along with any of them. He wasn't rude, he wasn't dismissive, he was just completely immovable. And every reporter in that room knew they weren't getting anything out of him on that subject. But here's where it gets genuinely interesting. While Monken was stonewalling every direct question about the competition itself, he was simultaneously and voluntarily offering detailed, specific praise about Shedeur Sanders without anyone even asking him to. Nobody forced that information out of him. He brought it up himself. A coach who routinely gives reporters nothing handed them something significant, and he chose to do it on his own terms. That is not accidental. Veteran coaches with Monken's background understand that every single word they say in front of a microphone travels instantly. Players hear it, the locker room hears it, veterans process it, and critically, the young quarterback in the middle of the competition hears it too. When a head coach publicly acknowledges a player's growth in the exact areas where that player has been most heavily doubted, it accomplishes something no private conversation in a film room ever could. It tells the entire football world, including the player himself, that the growth is real, it's visible, and it's being noticed at the highest level. That's a coaching move, a deliberate, calculated, experienced coaching move, and Monken executed it perfectly, while somehow leaving reporters with nothing quotable about the competition itself. But to understand why any of this matters as much as it does, you have to go back to where this whole story actually started. For months leading into the 2025 NFL Draft, the football world had essentially made up its mind about Shedeur Sanders. Multiple respected analysts had him as a first-round lock. Several prominent mock drafts had him going somewhere in the top 10. There was genuine discussion in legitimate football circles about whether he could go as high as top 5. The measurables were there. The college production was undeniable. The arm talent was obvious to anyone who watched him play at Colorado. And yet, round 1 came and went. No Shedeur Sanders. Round 2, nothing. Round 3, still nothing. By round 4, the football internet was starting to get genuinely uncomfortable. People who had spent months confidently declaring he'd be a top 10 pick were quietly editing their predictions. Sports talk radio hosts were stumbling over explanations. And then the 5th round arrived, and the Cleveland Browns called his name with the 144th overall pick, and the reaction online was something close to collective disbelief. Not because Cleveland took him, but because he had fallen that far in the first place. Deshaun Sanders later described the experience as agonizing for his family, and that's not hard to understand at all. Imagine spending your entire college career being told you were one of the most talented quarterback prospects in the country. Imagine watching film sessions, interviews, combine workouts, and pro days all build toward what everyone expects to be a historic draft moment. And then sit there for 3 days and watch team after team make a different choice. That experience doesn't leave a player quickly. It sits with him. It either breaks him or it becomes fuel. And what happened next made it very clear which direction Shedeur Sanders went with it. The reasons for the slide have been debated ever since. Some pointed to his pre-draft interview process and suggested certain organizations came away with concerns. Others believed NFL teams were specifically wary of the attention that follows anything connected to the Sanders family name, calculating that the media circus surrounding Deshaun might create complications inside a franchise trying to operate quietly. Whatever the actual reasons were, and we may never know all of them, the result was the same. A quarterback many expected to go in the top 10 was sitting in the 5th round with a chip on his shoulder the size of Lake Erie. He arrived in Cleveland at the very bottom of the depth chart, 3rd string, learning a system, watching from the sideline, waiting. And then, one by one, the circumstances shifted. Joe Flacco got traded, Dylan Gabriel went down with an injury, and suddenly, almost accidentally, Shedeur Sanders found himself in the starting lineup of an NFL franchise. The moment plenty of people had been publicly doubting arrived without fanfare, without a parade, without any of the spectacle his critics had spent months predicting would follow him. What he did with that opportunity is the part of this story that tends to get buried under all the contract drama and the media noise and the quarterback competition headlines. Against Tennessee, Shedeur Sanders threw for 364 yards. He accounted for 4 total touchdowns, and he did it against an actual NFL defense, not a practice squad. According to NFL records from that game, those 364 passing yards represented the 3rd best single-game performance ever by a Browns rookie quarterback. 3rd best ever in the entire history of that franchise. But the number that genuinely stops you in your tracks is this one. In his first 3 career starts, Shedeur Sanders completed 4 passes of 50 or more yards. 4! The only other quarterback since the year 2000 to accomplish that in his first 3 career starts was Aaron Rodgers. Let that settle for a second. Not a similar player, not a comparable prospect. Aaron Rodgers, one of the most decorated quarterbacks in NFL history, is the only other person in 25 years to do what Shedeur Sanders did in his first 3 games as a starting NFL quarterback. Nobody's saying he's Aaron Rodgers. That's not the point, and it would be ridiculous to suggest. But that statistic belongs to someone with explosive playmaking ability that exists completely independent of his last name, his draft position, and everything the doubters said about him. He finished that first stretch as a starter with a 3-4 record, 7 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, just over 1,400 yards passing. Not perfect numbers, not the finished product, but the back-to-back wins over Pittsburgh and Cincinnati to close the season told you something about the player that statistics alone never could. When the moment was biggest, he didn't shrink from it, he grew into it. And that growth carried directly into the offseason.
When news broke from OTA Day 2 that Deshaun Watson was taking first-team reps and Shedeur Sanders was starting the day with the second unit, social media did exactly what social media always does. It ran with the most dramatic possible interpretation and refused to let go. Within hours, the conclusion had already been written, published, shared, argued over, and accepted as fact by thousands of people who hadn't watched a single snap of practice. Watson is QB1. The competition is over. Shedeur is done. There was just one fairly significant detail that got left out of almost every single one of those posts and takes and debate segments. Later in the same practice, Shedeur Sanders rotated in and finished the day's team drills with the first unit offense. He didn't spend the entire practice with the second team. He worked his way into first-team reps before the session ended. That's not a minor footnote. In an open quarterback competition where Todd Monken has consistently stated that no one has locked down the starting spot, how a player finishes the day matters as much as how he starts it. And that detail was quietly ignored by a media cycle more interested in the drama of the competition than the actual details of it. On the field, Shedeur completed 7 of his first 11 throws during team drills. That's nearly a 64% completion rate in a brand new offensive system, with a new coaching staff still installing terminology against a defense that had been studying the same playbook for the same amount of time. That number is solid by any reasonable measure, and it's genuinely impressive given the circumstances. Yes, he threw an interception. Social media treated it like a national emergency, but even that play came with context. Reports from reporters physically at the practice indicated that there was disagreement about what actually happened on that throw, with some observers suggesting Jerry Jeudy ran the wrong route and others thinking Shedeur anticipated a break that didn't happen on time. Both explanations can be true simultaneously. That's football. That's what happens when receivers and quarterbacks are still building chemistry in week 2 of spring workouts. What mattered more than the interception were the throws that came after it. Intermediate completions over the middle of the field, throws into tight windows, quick releases against pressure. These are not the throws a tentative quarterback makes when he's trying to protect his stats in a public competition. These are the throws of a player who trusts his arm, trusts his receivers, and isn't playing scared. Multiple reporters who were present noted his confidence in those moments. Not recklessness, confidence. There's a significant difference, and coaches noticed that distinction immediately. And all of that happened while another conversation was brewing on the other sideline. Let's be completely straightforward here, because this part of the story deserves honesty more than it deserves drama. Nobody is rooting for Deshaun Watson to fail. No reasonable person watches an athlete battle through multiple serious injuries and thinks to themselves, "Good, I hope it keeps going that way." That's not what this is. But Browns fans and the media surrounding this team have spent so long dancing carefully around the Watson reality that they've lost the ability to have a clear-eyed conversation about it. The facts are these. Since arriving in Cleveland, Deshaun Watson has appeared in 19 games. 19. In a contract worth $230 million in fully guaranteed money. A contract that carries approximately $46 million per year in cash and approaches $73 million annually in salary cap implications. Owner Jimmy Haslam, not some anonymous critic, not a sports radio host, but the actual owner of the franchise, publicly acknowledged that the move was a big swing and a miss. That's billionaire language for things went very wrong very fast. The injury history is brutal by any objective standard. A league suspension cost him time early, then shoulder problems, then an Achilles injury in 2024 that essentially wiped out his season. And then, just when a clear path back to the field seemed possible, another Achilles complication surfaced, requiring a second surgery on the same leg. 2 surgeries on the same Achilles. For a quarterback whose entire game has always been built around the ability to move, extend plays, shake off pressure, and turn chaos into highlight reel moments, that history raises questions that money and reputation cannot answer on their own. To his credit, Watson looked genuinely explosive during OTA workouts. Todd Monken described his athleticism as a superpower, which is the kind of language coaches use when they see something that genuinely excites them. And anyone who watched Watson during his Houston years knows exactly what that superpower looks like at full capacity. There were seasons when defenders looked completely helpless trying to contain him. He could make plays that shouldn't exist. His talent has never been the question.
The question has always been the same question. Can he stay healthy long enough for any of it to matter? And in late May of 2026, with every practice rep being analyzed under a microscope, that question doesn't have an answer yet. Every impressive throw Watson makes in OTAs comes with a shadow. Not because people want it to, but because the history of the last 4 years demands that the shadow be acknowledged. That's the reality. That's what makes this competition something entirely different from a normal quarterback battle. And the media, to nobody's surprise, has been doing everything in its power to make it as complicated as possible. If you've been following the Browns quarterback situation through traditional sports media this offseason, here's what your experience has probably looked like. One day, a prominent NFL reporter says Watson clearly has the edge. The next day, a different reporter says Shedeur is quietly gaining ground. Then, an anonymous league source tells someone with a press credential that the competition is essentially already over before training camp begins. Sports radio runs with it, YouTube thumbnails go to all caps, debate segments fill 3 hours of programming with people arguing passionately about things nobody outside that practice facility actually knows. And then, the cycle resets the next morning. Meanwhile, Todd Monken has been sitting in that press conference room watching all of it like a man watching a fire he didn't start and has no intention of helping extinguish. Reporters keep walking in expecting drama. Monken keeps treating their questions like pop-up ads. He's there, he acknowledges them, and then he closes the window without giving them anything useful. When one reporter at the Day 2 press conference essentially asked whether anything had shifted in the quarterback competition, Monken reportedly looked at him and said something to the effect that nothing had changed, except it was a different day and they were asking the same questions. That's not just deflection, that's a coach communicating very clearly that he understands exactly what the media is trying to do, he's not going to participate in it, and anyone who keeps asking the same question should expect the same non-answer. Some coaches would have bristled at the persistent questioning by now. Monken treats it with the patience of someone who has been through bigger media storms than a Cleveland quarterback competition and came out the other side perfectly fine. But here's the part that matters most about his media strategy, the part that reveals how calculated this whole thing actually is. Monken refuses to give reporters a direct answer about who's winning the competition. That's the defensive part of his press conference approach. But the offensive part, the part most people haven't focused on, is that he keeps proactively offering specific, detailed praise about Shedeur Sanders without being asked. Nobody is pulling that information out of him. He's walking up to that microphone and choosing to say it. Coaches understand that press conferences are not just for reporters, they're for players, for locker rooms, for the entire organizational ecosystem that processes every word a head coach says in public. When Monken goes out of his way to specifically mention Shedeur's improved processing speed, his faster release, his deeper grasp of the offensive system, he is sending a message to every person in that building. He's telling his veteran players that this young quarterback is earning respect at the coaching staff level. He's telling Shedeur himself that the work is being noticed, and he's telling the national media, without saying it directly, that the story they've been writing all offseason might need a significant revision. That is not the behavior of a coaching staff that has already privately decided Watson is the answer. Coaches who have already made their minds don't spend their press conference time building up the other guy. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. While the Watson and Shedeur conversation was consuming every available inch of Browns media coverage during OTA week, something happened on that practice field that deserves its own conversation entirely. Denzel Boston, the Browns' second-round rookie receiver out of Washington, caught a deep touchdown pass from Deshaun Watson over the coverage of two defenders. Not one, two. Tyson Campbell and Ronnie Hickman both had position on the play, and Boston went up and came down with the football anyway. Todd Monken's reaction at the podium afterward told you everything about what that catch meant. This is a man who has coached at the highest levels of college football, who has seen thousands of practices and hundreds of thousands of individual plays. He stood in front of reporters and essentially said, "That was incredible, wasn't it?" with the genuine excitement of someone who just watched something unexpected and special happen. Coaches don't react to routine plays that way. They react that way when a player does something that makes them reconsider what they thought they knew.
The scouting report on Boston coming out of the draft was skeptical. Critics questioned whether he could consistently create separation at the NFL level. Draft analysts pointed to his movement and questioned whether his game would translate. These are the conversations that happen every April about every player who gets selected. And then, Boston showed up to his first professional practices and immediately made those conversations look significantly less certain. His production at Washington was real. Over 60 receptions, nearly 900 yards, 11 touchdowns, third team All-Big Ten. That doesn't happen by accident or by reputation. That's a player who knows how to play football. Now add that to what's already surrounding him. Amari Cooper on one side, Jerry Jeudy on the other, David Njoku at tight end. This is a legitimate receiving corps with different physical profiles, different route running abilities, and different matchup problems for opposing defenses. The quarterback who wins this competition doesn't step into a broken situation and get asked to carry everything on his back. He steps into a real offense with real weapons and gets to be the engine of something that could actually work. That changes the calculation entirely. Because quarterback competitions aren't evaluated in a vacuum. Coaches watch which player elevates the group around him. They watch chemistry, timing, leadership, and the way teammates respond. And with this collection of offensive talent, whoever emerges as QB1 will have every tool he needs to make an immediate impact. That makes the competition more urgent, not less, and it makes what happens at the mandatory minicamp in June more significant than any off-season practice has any right to be. Here's where the stakes move from interesting to genuinely enormous. According to multiple reports from Sports Illustrated and other credible NFL outlets, Todd Monken intends to have a starting quarterback named before training camp officially opens in July. That's not a soft deadline. That's a hard line in the competitive calendar with real organizational implications. Between now and that announcement, every single rep in every single practice session carries franchise-level weight. The mandatory minicamp runs June 9th through the 11th. That 3-day stretch will be the most scrutinized practice period the Browns have had in years. Media access increases, intensity increases, the complexity of the scheme increases because the coaching staff will push further into the playbook than they can during voluntary OTAs. Every completion in 7-on-7 drills will be frame-by-frame analyzed online before the session even ends. Every deep ball will be a debate. Every interception will be a crisis for someone's corner of social media. Every perfectly placed throw into a tight window will be someone's evidence that the competition is over. But through all of that noise, the person whose opinion actually matters has already told you what he's looking for. Monken wants decision-making. He wants a quarterback who processes information quickly, gets the ball out on time, understands what the defense is showing, and consistently moves the offense down the field. Those are not poetic concepts. Those are specific, measurable things that show up on every single practice rep, whether a camera is rolling or not. And the fact that he's already publicly declared that Shedeur Sanders has made remarkable strides in exactly those areas is not information to be casually scrolled past. This 2026 season is not just a regular year for the Cleveland Browns. New head coach, new offensive coordinator in Kellen Moore, a roster actively trying to close the door on one of the most painful chapters in the franchise's recent history.
The quarterback who starts Week 1 against Jacksonville isn't just playing a football game. He's becoming the face of an entirely new direction for a franchise that has been searching for stability at that position for longer than most of its fans want to remember. The weight of that reality sits on every throw these two quarterbacks make between now and July. And right now, based on everything that has happened in the last 2 weeks of OTA practices, the competitive picture looks genuinely open. More open, honestly, than the national narrative has been willing to admit. Let's go back to where this story began, because the distance between where Shedeur Sanders was 12 months ago and where he stands today is something worth sitting with for a moment. 12 months ago, he was a fifth-round pick that most of the football world had already written a specific story about. The story was that he was a product of his father's fame, that the hype around him was manufactured by celebrity and social media attention rather than earned through football ability, that he wasn't ready for the NFL level intellectually or mechanically, that Cleveland had made a sentimental pick rather than a football pick. That was the consensus, not a fringe opinion, a genuine consensus held by a significant portion of the league's analysts and media members.
Then he played, and he made those throws, and he beat Pittsburgh, and he beat Cincinnati. And now his head coach, a man who built championship offenses at one of the most demanding programs in college football, who has no incentive to publicly overstate a young quarterback's development, and who has spent this entire offseason expertly avoiding saying anything definitive about the competition itself, has gone out of his way on multiple occasions to specifically praise the growth of Shedeur Sanders in the exact areas where the doubters spent the most time attacking him. That's not a coincidence. That pattern doesn't happen by accident. The fifth-round label was never a reflection of his talent. The draft process has always been imperfect, influenced by factors that have nothing to do with what a player can do between the lines on Sundays. And what Shedeur Sanders has done between those lines, with limited opportunity in a chaotic situation on a team with massive organizational instability around him, represents something that deserves to be evaluated honestly and completely, not filtered through the draft position he ended up with or the last name he was born with. Deshaun Watson is still in this competition. That point needs to be stated clearly and without qualification. He's competing. He's healthy right now. He's showing the athleticism that made him one of the most exciting quarterbacks in football during his best seasons, and the Browns will absolutely take every available piece of information before making a decision that carries this much financial and organizational consequence. Nobody is handing Shedeur Sanders anything. That's not how Todd Monken operates. But the quarterback competition heading into June of 2026 is not the formality the national media spent all winter suggesting it would be. It's real, it's open, and the most powerful voice in the Cleveland organization has, through both what he said and how he's chosen to say it, been telling anyone paying close enough attention that the young quarterback everyone dismissed on draft night has become something worth taking very seriously. This race isn't decided, not even close, but if the trajectory of the last 2 weeks of OTA practices continues through minicamp and into training camp, the conversation around the Cleveland quarterback situation is going to sound very different from what we've been hearing all offseason. The narrative has already started to shift. Most of the national media just hasn't caught up to it yet, but they will. And when they do, a lot of people are going to have to quietly revise everything they said about a fifth-round pick from Colorado, who apparently didn't get the memo that he was supposed to be an afterthought. The clock is running, the reps are counting, and in Cleveland, for the first time in a long time, the quarterback competition actually means something. Pay attention.